Okay, so here's an example of a story of self that I find particularly touching and inspiring. Malala says, I tell my story not because it's unique, but because it's the story of many girls. I was born in Mingora, Pakistan on July 12, 1997. Welcoming a baby girl is not always cause for celebration in Pakistan, but my father, Ziauddin Yousafzai, was determined to give me every opportunity a boy would have. My father was a teacher and ran a girls' school in our village. I loved school. But everything changed when the Taliban took control of our town in Swat Valley. The extremists banned many things, like owning a television and playing music, and enforced harsh punishments for those who defied their orders. And they said girls could no longer go to school. Even as a young girl, I could not accept this. I chose to speak out publicly on behalf of girls and our right to learn. And this made me a target. In October 2012, on my way home from school, a masked gunman boarded my school bus and asked, "Who is Malala?" He shot me in the left side of the head. I woke up 10 days later in a hospital in Birmingham, England. The doctors and nurses told me about the attack and that people around the world were praying for my recovery. After months of surgeries and rehabilitation, I joined my family in our new home in the UK. It was then I knew I had a choice. I could live a quiet life, or I could make the most of this new life I had been given. I determined to continue my fight until every girl could go to school. With my father, who has always been my ally and inspiration, I established Malala Fund, a charity dedicated to giving every girl an opportunity to achieve a future she chooses. In recognition of our work, I received the Nobel Peace Prize in December 2014 and became the youngest ever Nobel laureate. I began studying philosophy, politics, and economics at the University of Oxford, and every day I fight to ensure all girls receive 12 years of free, safe, quality education. I travel to many countries to meet girls fighting poverty, wars, child marriage, and gender discrimination to go to school. Malala Fund is working so that their stories, like mine, can be heard around the world. With more than 130 million girls out of school today, there is more work to be done. I hope you will join my fight for education and equality. Together, we can create a world where all girls can learn and lead. And to find out more about Malala and her work, you can go to malala.org, website from which this story of self was adapted. So in Malala's story, we see the same three elements we saw in the story of David and Goliath. She makes this challenge of the Taliban invading her valley. We feel it. She describes her family. She describes that day where the masked man came on the school bus and shot her in the left side of the head. And she wakes up in the UK, and at that point she had every possible reason to live a quiet life, to become a scholar maybe or a teacher, but she chose instead to create a fund, a global fund to support activists like her, to use her fame to raise money and raise attention to this issue and support a network of girls like her and activists like her and her father to take action in their communities. And as you can see from her website, if you go, the fund has already invested $47 million in 9 countries, including a network of over 100 education champions that worked together to facilitate the settlement of 200 Afghan activists after the takeover of Kabul in 2021. And of course, her work was recognized with the Nobel Peace Prize. So we see the moral of the story is from her actions. We see that with this kind of courage and this philosophy of local action but mutual support across national boundaries, that we can all become leaders of this kind of system-wide change. So how can you develop your own story of self? Well, of course, you have many stories. You have lots of stories from your life. You don't just have one story of self, you have hundreds of them. But what you want to do is figure out what are the stories that relate or transmit what's most important to you. I chose a story in that first video about Laura because that experience on the Obama campaign of watching people go from complete newcomers to politics to becoming organizers and leaders is something I think about almost every day. That to me is the core of what it means to live democracy, not as a system of political parties and elections, but as a way of life where people realize their truest potential by taking action for something greater than themselves. And so that's why it's a story of self that I go back to. Marshall encourages us to think about these kind of choices in critical moments, like, when I was in the parking lot, do I push and try to, keep control over the day, or do I let go and give the responsibility to one of my volunteers? So we all have choices like that have shaped our path, whether challenges as children, how we found our way to what we do today, how we responded to needs, demands, and gifts of others, how we confront challenges at school, in our community, and in our work. So think of these kind of moments in your life that were most important to you, that you think of, and that say something about what matters to you. Why do you feel like this was a challenge? What was challenging about it? Why was it a challenge that was your challenge, that was something particularly important to you? Why did you make the choice that you did? Where did you get the courage or not? Where did you get the hope or not to take action? Did your parents or grandparents' life stories teach you how to act in that moment? How did it feel to make the choice, right? You want to slow down at this moment of choice in the story, like we did with David and the king. Go beat by beat and listen to what's happening in that moment of choice. And then the outcome and moral, how did that outcome feel? Why did it feel that way? What did it teach you? What do you then want to teach us? How do you want us to feel about this experience? So these are some of the questions that Marshall poses as how we can develop this story of self. And I want to share a recent experiment that I think is very interesting that I read about the other day. In 2021, Adam Galinsky of Columbia Business School conducted 2 studies with Swiss citizens that had newly registered with a government employment agency. So the studies together had around 800, 900 people participate in this study. And within that group, a randomly selected subgroup were asked to undertake a 10 to 15 minute exercise where they reflected on the values that mattered most to them. And just in this simple experiment, the result was that those who did this exercise were 3 times more likely to find a job than those who did not. Right? So this is just one little study, one piece of evidence that this kind of reflection on the past experiences that shape our lives can be really helpful in making progress towards our goals. Another concept that I want to share comes from Roland Barthes, a great French art historian and thinker and sociologist, who in his book Camera Lucida describes how we take meaning from photographs and images. And you look at this photo on the right. This is a photo of a young woman named Elizabeth Eckford, African-American woman in Arkansas, who was walking to her first school after the famous Supreme Court case of Brown versus Board of Education had desegregated public schools, or had ordered the southern states to desegregate their schools. And as you can see from the picture, she faced a lot of loneliness and opposition on her first day at Little Rock Central High School. Barthes says that the studium of a photo, this is from the Latin word for zeal or attention, gives us the why of the image. It's the set of meanings that come to us from the image as a whole, about what's the historical moment, a social class, a national identity, power relations. So you see that in this picture you have a lonely, isolated, a young black girl who is surrounded by white people who you can see from their faces are hostile to her and potentially have power to shape her life, but she is brave and dignified and well-dressed and poised. And then Barth says there's also a point, the punctum. The punctum is this hurtfully, personally touching detail that establishes a direct relationship with the object or the person it contains. It's the detail that sticks in your memory, that engraves itself in your memory. So what's the detail that our eyes naturally go to in this photo? It's this woman right here, and it's her open mouth, yelling, screaming, probably something abusive, racist against this young woman. That's the punctum, right? Why is this important for us? Well, because this is the kind of lesson, I think, that help us build a good story, right? When we're developing a story, we want to give details that are visual, that give your listener a sense of the place, a sense of the time. I tried to make you feel what it was like in that parking lot, right? And tell you about Laura as an art historian, and just give those kind of details that gives the mood, the sense of the place, the time, the people, right? That's the kind of the visual detail that we use to try to get attention. And then there's the punctum, right? You know, for me in my story, it was the spicy soup at the end of the day. It's a moment in the plot that evokes a strong emotion. In my case, that soup was a kind of a point of pride that, my team had done something great and I didn't have to be there. So it's the little moments in the plot that evoke a strong emotion, like also with the David and Goliath, the 5 smooth stones, or taking off the armor of the king. Right. So these are some of the building blocks of a really powerful story that stimulate, as we've seen, the mirror neurons. It creates this unconscious simulation of the experience in the mind of your listener. So finally, the story of self best practices I want to share is, begin by thinking about you don't have to tell a long story. Think about what are the details of the place, the time, the people that will help us visualize it. Make it like a little movie, right? Put us in a place. And then make us feel like the risk or the challenge or the crisis or the danger, like the giant, screaming, or like me holding my head in my hands and being totally burned out. And then at the moment of choice, you have to slow down. This is where you give, the beat to beat, what people said, how people reacted, what it felt like. And then the moment of choice should also help paint an alternative, right? David could have put the armor on and been weaker, or he chose to take it off and be superficially more vulnerable, but actually be stronger in fighting the giant. Or my choice to either push through and keep control, or let control go, and allow Laura to take the reins. Talk about what gave you this strength or inspiration, if this is something that you feel comfortable doing. Why did you make the choice that you made? And then in the outcome, you simply show where that choice led. And it's okay if the choice, turns out badly, because there might be great learning that comes from disappointment or failure or setbacks. So these are just a couple of tips, and you really want the majority of the story to be around that moment of choice. So you try to set up the story quickly, get to that moment of choice, and then really slow down. What did it feel like? What were the alternatives? And then once you've made the choice, the outcome and the moral are kind of the icing on the cake. So these are some best practices, and look forward to hearing your stories of self.